The 180-degree rule: unlearning the lies we've been taught to believe. 1. Introduction. It began with a mystery, a book arriving out of nowhere, no note, no message, just a title that quietly mocked modern certainty. 180 degrees, unlearn the lies you've been taught to believe. That alone was suspicious enough to make any rational scholar either open it immediately or run screaming. Thankfully, curiosity won. What followed wasn't conspiracy. It was construction, of logic, evidence, and an uncomfortable mirror reflecting how reality gets inverted. The author, writing anonymously, spent roughly 6 years assembling it, research, editing, fact-checking, and fighting off both cognitive dissonance and common sense. The result, a text that makes readers question whether they've been living in an elaborate stage play run by bankers, politicians, and professional illusionists. So what does that actually mean? It means flipping the narrative 180 degrees, not for drama, but for clarity. Inversion becomes revelation. Lies dissolve when turned inside out. The humor, strangely, lies in the obviousness. We all use money, trust experts, and obey headlines, yet few ever ask who writes the rules. The author simply held up the mirror and said, "Look again." Footnote. The book's arrival was as cryptic as its message. Truth often knocks without introduction. 2. The technique of inversion. The core principle is simple: everything is backwards. What's marketed as progress often conceals regression. What's called safety frequently masks control. By flipping lies 180 degrees, the truth crawls out like a cat disturbed mid-nap. Consider money, the supposed bedrock of civilization. The author argues it's closer to sand than stone. Our monetary system is portrayed as an elaborate deception where debt, not value, drives everything. When you think you're depositing funds, the bank is actually creating new money out of thin air, then charging you interest on it. Not bad work if you can get it. So what does that actually mean? It means banks don't lend money, they manufacture it through keystrokes, turning debt into wealth and citizens into unwitting collateral. The reader is invited to laugh, cry, or audit the next statement from their bank manager. Preferably all three. Footnote. Inversion, the author claims, isn't just a metaphor, it's an operating system for modern power. 3. The nature of lies and the machinery of belief. Lies are surprisingly well dressed. They arrive in suits, hold press conferences, and quote data. The author calls this the craft, the ancient art of making evil look respectable. Truth, on the other hand, tends to show up late, barefoot, and bad at small talk. The key to manipulation, he explains, is scale. Tiny lies trigger skepticism. Big lies short-circuit the brain. When a falsehood is enormous enough, people dismiss it because it feels impossible. That's why the biggest deceptions succeed. They hide in plain sight behind the phrase "that can't possibly be true." So what does that actually mean? It means society's disbelief is its own defense mechanism, one skillfully weaponized. When you hear that's a conspiracy, what you're really hearing is "please don't make me rethink everything I believe." Fear seals the deal. Nothing disables critical thinking faster. Fear shifts the mind from reason to survival, turning adults into obedient children. Governments and media know this well. Frightened citizens don't argue policy, they obey it. Humor helps us survive the absurdity. As the author quips, if you ever feel confused by world events, just ask yourself who benefits, then prepare to be mildly horrified. Footnote. The larger the lie, the safer it hides. Disbelief becomes camouflage. 4. Propaganda and psychological conditioning. Propaganda isn't new, it's just better funded. From ancient Rome's problem-reaction solution tactics to modern public health campaigns, the formula remains constant: create fear, promise safety, sell control. The author warns that truth is slow, lies are fast. The media knows this. Entire populations can be steered before breakfast. The secret isn't censorship, it's overload. Drown people in data until they can't tell signal from noise, and they'll accept the official version simply to get some sleep. So what does that actually mean? It means attention, not information, is the real battlefield. Whoever controls what you look at controls what you think. He adds a dash of humor: if ignorance is bliss, then today's internet is the happiest place on earth. And yet, the reader is not left hopeless. The cure for manipulation is curiosity. Ask why, then who profits? Two questions that can ruin a perfectly good narrative. Footnote: propaganda doesn't force belief, it fatigues doubt. 5. Fear, herd mentality, and the economics of control. Fear is the oldest tool of governance. It doesn't need logic, just repetition. The author reminds us that fear reduces humans to childlike obedience, shutting down logic while lighting up panic. In fear, people stop asking why and start asking what do I do next? That's when power steps in, gently, of course, to protect them. So what does that actually mean? Fear is the currency of compliance. Once a population is frightened, control is no longer enforced, it's requested. People will gladly chain themselves if you promise safety and give them a slogan. This same principle fuels modern economics. When money becomes debt, and debt becomes identity, fear of loss replaces physical chains. The author jokes that the modern serf doesn't till the land, he just checks his balance. Cognitive dissonance follows. Citizens can simultaneously distrust politicians yet obey them. They can mock the media, then quote it 10 minutes later. The contradiction doesn't bother them, it comforts them. It means they belong. Herd thinking isn't stupidity, it's social survival. And that's the trick, the system doesn't need everyone to believe the lie. It only needs enough people afraid of standing alone. Footnote: fear isn't the absence of freedom, it's the illusion that obedience is safety. 6. Manufactured consent and the mechanics of obedience. The author argues that modern power doesn't rely on violence, it relies on narrative. Force terrifies, stories persuade. Governments discovered long ago that people will defend their own captivity if they believe it's moral. Here's the pattern: create a crisis, shape the narrative, and offer one official solution. Dissenters are branded dangerous, not wrong. Truth becomes misinformation, a label so effective it no longer requires evidence. So what does that actually mean? It means censorship doesn't look like silence anymore, it looks like safety messaging. Humor lightens the darkness: if history repeats, we should really stop voting for sequels. The author's deeper point is that obedience is no longer demanded, it's engineered through social pressure, digital shame, and algorithmic visibility. You don't have to burn books if no one can find them. Footnote: the new censorship doesn't erase words, it buries them under convenience. 7. The monetary deception, how money becomes the master. Money was once a tool. Now it's the puppeteer. The author exposes the quiet transformation: what used to measure value now creates it, out of thin air. Literally. Banks no longer lend money they have, they lend money they invent. You sign the paperwork, and poof, digits appear on a screen. It's alchemy, minus the gold. So what does that actually mean? It means you're borrowing numbers that didn't exist until you promised to repay them, with interest. The bank risks nothing but collects everything. If that sounds like a rigged game, it's because it is. He walks through the absurd logic: when you deposit money, the bank legally owns it. You become an unsecured creditor, basically, someone who hopes to get their own money back. And while you're hoping, the bank lends it 10 more times. It's not theft, it's policy. Modern finance runs on belief. As long as people believe those numbers represent value, the illusion holds. The moment they don't, the system collapses faster than a soufflé in a hurricane. The author injects dry humor: if money talks, it's usually lying. The deeper tragedy? Debt replaces dignity. Citizens stop asking for justice and start asking for credit. It's a quiet conversion, from sovereigns to supplicants, with compound interest. Footnote: the greatest trick money ever pulled was convincing the world it was real. 8. Fiat faith, the religion of the invisible ledger. Every religion needs faith, ritual, and a priesthood. Modern banking has all three. The faith, that paper and digits hold value. The ritual, signing contracts and paying taxes. The priesthood, economists explaining why you shouldn't worry about inflation, or question their salaries. So what does that actually mean? The system survives because belief is cheaper than gold. When governments abandoned real backing, they replaced it with promises. Paper money became fiat currency, value by decree. Let it be so, says the state, and so it is. The author's tone is part academic, part comedian. If God said let there be light, central bankers said let there be debt. He points out a paradox: societies now worship what they should manage. Money was invented to serve trade, not rule over it. Yet today, the economy dictates morality. A war isn't judged by ethics but by market response. Faith in the ledger is so strong that even when currencies crash, people line up to exchange one illusion for another. That's not economics, that's devotion. Footnote. Fiat money is belief in printed promises, and belief, unlike gold, can vanish overnight. 9. The empire cycle, when great nations go on sale. Every empire tells the same story: rise, glory, decay, and sale. The author, half historian and half stand-up philosopher, shows that the fall isn't caused by outsiders. It's caused by overconfidence, bureaucracy, and bad math. He jokes, empires don't collapse, they retire on someone else's savings. So what does that actually mean? Once a nation starts printing more promises than it can keep, it's already in hospice care. The collapse begins not with war, but with welfare. Citizens forget how to build, they learn how to beg. When the moral spine softens, politicians step in to manage decline, usually while buying new mansions. Empires also love distractions. Bread and circuses once worked. Now it's subsidies and smartphones. The method is the same: keep the masses entertained and the thinkers exhausted. The author notes that the United States sits at the same historical point as Rome, Britain, and Babylon once did, around 250 years after founding. We're not doomed, he writes, we're just historically punctual. Footnote. Empires die from debt, not daggers. The barbarians usually arrive for cleanup duty. 10. The collapse of morality, when right becomes optional. Morality used to be the anchor. Now it's a marketing slogan. The author ties societal collapse to a spiritual vacuum, not just loss of faith, but loss of meaning. So what does that actually mean? When truth becomes subjective, power fills the void. Lies wear suits. Evil rebrands itself as efficiency. And citizens, desperate for comfort, trade freedom for convenience. He describes demoralization, a state where people no longer know good from bad. It's not depression, it's social anesthesia. Once morality dissolves, propaganda becomes the only compass. The crowd cheers for the very chains that bind them. With dry humor, he adds, when everything's relative, even tyranny sounds reasonable. The law itself shifts from protecting rights to enforcing compliance. And compliance, once voluntary, becomes sacred duty. That's how democracies quietly transform into polite dictatorships, with smiling faces and biometric IDs. Footnote. When morality is optional, tyranny becomes inevitable. 11. Manufactured fear, how panic replaces policy. The author calls fear the oldest marketing campaign on earth. From pandemics to politics, fear keeps people obedient. When the crowd is scared, logic takes a nap. So what does that actually mean? Fear turns adults into children. It disables the frontal cortex, the part that asks, wait, does this make sense? That's why fear is the government's favorite drug, it's addictive and tax deductible. He points out that modern fear doesn't even need proof. All it needs is repetition. A daily dose of doom from the media and people will volunteer for their own restrictions. Stay home, stay safe, stay silent. The humor lands softly: if fear were a currency, we'd all be billionaires. The lesson? Learn to pause before reacting. Fear sells because it works fast, but truth needs time. The pause between panic and thought is where freedom hides. Footnote. The easiest way to control a population is to convince them they're in danger, even when they're not. 12. False flags, the theater of control. False flags are the oldest magic trick in politics. Stage an attack, blame someone else, and collect public support for whatever you already wanted to do. The author defines them simply: covert operations disguised to look like the enemy did it. It's not conspiracy, it's a documented military tactic. So what does that actually mean? Imagine a government burning its own barn, blaming the neighbors, and then marching off to seize their fields. Citizens mourn the barn but cheer the invasion. It's manipulation so brazen most people can't believe it happens, which is precisely why it works. He offers historic examples: Lusitania in World War I, Pearl Harbor in World War II, where leaders knew more than they admitted. These cases show the pattern: crisis first, truth later, and justice never. Humor tempers the grimness. If governments were magicians, false flags would be their rabbit-out-of-a-hat routine. The lesson isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. When an event immediately produces legislation, war, or sweeping powers, ask not only what happened but who benefits. Footnote. False flags aren't rare, they're the main plot device of empires. 13. Manufactured reality, how to invert the truth. The author describes a simple but devastating technique: invert the truth. If freedom is your goal, call it security. If control is your goal, call it progress. Inversions work because the human brain processes labels faster than facts. So what does that actually mean? It means if you dress a wolf in a health and safety uniform, the sheep will open the gate for him. Modern power relies on narrative inversion more than brute force. Citizens now police each other's speech, shame dissent, and cheer censorship, believing they're protecting society. It's not oppression, it's community standards. Humor slips in: when evil wants a makeover, it hires a PR firm. The deeper insight is that people aren't stupid, they're overwhelmed. Inversions exploit trust. When everyone is too busy to verify, slogans replace facts. Footnote. Inversion doesn't just hide lies, it recruits the public to enforce them. 14. Psychological warfare, the war you don't see. The author argues modern conflict is no longer fought with bombs but with bandwidth. The new battlefield is perception. Victories happen inside your head long before they happen on a map. So what does that actually mean? It means propaganda isn't information, it's weaponized attention. Governments and corporations don't need to censor everything, they just need to flood the zone until you can't tell what's real. He warns that cognitive dissonance is now the default state. People can watch two conflicting news stories, believe both, and never notice. This isn't stupidity, it's stress. And stressed people don't rebel. Dry humor lands softly, they don't burn books anymore, they bury them under cat videos. The takeaway? Learn to pause, verify, and question incentives. Freedom now begins with controlling your own attention. Footnote. Modern warfare targets perception, not territory, minds, not borders. 15. The exit strategy, from fear to agency. After several hundred pages of intellectual demolition, the author finally takes pity on the reader. He calls this section the way out. And yes, there is one. Step 1, he says, is internal: stop outsourcing your thinking. The system feeds on obedience disguised as trust. So what does that actually mean? It means the moment you pause and ask, wait, who gains from this? You've already broken the spell. He suggests viewing propaganda as junk food for the mind, tempting, addictive, and nutritionally bankrupt. The cure isn't panic, it's discernment. Verify sources. Disconnect occasionally. Talk to real humans in person. It sounds almost rebellious now, doesn't it? Then comes the humor. Rebellion used to mean storming the palace. Now it just means logging off Twitter. But there's empathy behind it. He knows waking up is messy. Some people need 20 years, others only 20 minutes. Either way, The first breath of awareness always stings. Footnote. Conscious thought is the one act no tyrant can fully regulate, yet. 16. The power of communication, truth without alienation. The author offers a gentle warning: don't become the unbearable prophet on the hill. You can't wake people by yelling. Meet them where they are. Understand their fears. Speak softly but with precision. So what does that actually mean? It means truth without empathy becomes noise. People move from A to Z in order, not all at once. Shoving someone from everything's fine straight to the world is run by liars only makes them cling harder to the lie. He calls it informational aikido: redirect their momentum, don't fight it. Humor, patience, and compassion open doors that rage never will. He laughs at his own past mistakes: I used to throw facts like grenades. Turns out, that just clears the room. Footnote. Truth persuades better when it walks, not when it shouts. 17. Building parallel systems, the small circle solution. When empires wobble, communities survive. The author emphasizes the return to localism: smaller, interdependent groups trading trust, not tokens. Build parallel economies, he says: home gardens, mutual aid, skill sharing. So what does that actually mean? It means when the power goes out, your neighbor with a chicken coop is suddenly the most valuable man in town. Humor helps soften the reality: we can't stop global collapse, but we can make it cozy. He doesn't romanticize hardship, he redefines it as creative opportunity. When institutions fail, people rediscover meaning. The crisis isn't the end, it's the clearing where the new world starts. Footnote. The smaller the circle, the stronger the bond, and the weaker the empire. 18. The 180-degree rule, turning lies back into truth. Everything loops back to the book's title. If the lie turns truth upside down, then turning it 180 degrees restores reality. The method is simple: whenever something feels backward, flip it. If a policy sounds moral but enriches the powerful, it's probably deception wearing perfume. So what does that actually mean? It means you don't need all the facts, just a good compass. Lies feel heavy. Truth feels light. Test both. Humor caps it off: if every official statement feels like a riddle, the answer's probably money. The author ends not in despair but in calm defiance. He insists the antidote to manipulation isn't violence or vengeance, it's clarity. Once you see the trick, the magician loses power. Footnote. The truth doesn't need believers, only observers. 18. The 180-degree rule, turning lies back into truth. Everything loops back to the book's title. If the lie turns truth upside down, then turning it 180 degrees restores reality. The method is simple: whenever something feels backward, flip it. If a policy sounds moral but enriches the powerful, it's probably deception wearing perfume. So what does that actually mean? It means you don't need all the facts, just a good compass. Lies feel heavy. Truth feels light. Test both. Humor caps it off: if every official statement feels like a riddle, the answer's probably money. The author ends not in despair but in calm defiance. He insists the antidote to manipulation isn't violence or vengeance, it's clarity. Once you see the trick, the magician loses power. Footnote: the truth doesn't need believers, only observers.